Okay, so this time around we're going to be doing our Russian T34 76 tank from Hobby Boss in 48 scale, and this particular one has a full interior. So what I'm going to do on this build up is put the interior in, and I'm going to make a cutaway model. I'm going to cut half the turret away, half the hull, so we can see inside to look at all that lovely interior when it's done up. I've already opened the kit, everything seems to be okay, so I'll just get started and I'll take some photos and explain what I'm doing along the way. Okay, pretty much straight away we're starting to do some interior parts, and we have a choice to make here. I've done these little parts first, and they'll stick to the inside wall of the tank when it's done. Now they'll be mounted on these ammunition and different parts for the interior of the tank. So what you've got to decide is whether to put the parts on now and paint them in situ when they're actually inside the tank, which, I mean, I have done that, and it is doable, especially if you don't have to paint underneath, because we'll be looking down, we won't see the underneath of the parts, so you don't have to paint the tops and the sides. But it's going to be a fairly cramped space, because remember this is 48 scale, so what I'm choosing to do is leave the parts off. I'll paint the interior and I'll paint the parts separate and then stick them in. The choice is yours, but I just think with 48 scale it'll be a bit wiser to paint the parts separate and add them later. Well, so far so good, but just be warned, you're going to need some tweezers and pointy nose pliers and tools like that to get some of these parts in. These are quite small. I'm not sure if you can see that clearly there, but all these parts here are very awkward to get in because they've only got like little pinholes, and these had to be angled in the right way to go in. So yeah, just be warned, you're going to need tweezers and stuff to do all this sort of work. It is a little bit fiddly, but everything seems to be going together quite well so far. I'm going to show you some ways to get the cast iron effect on the turret. The Russians in World War II with these T34 turrets, they were all cast, so they had a fairly rough surface on them, and especially the Russian tanks, the cast effect was very rough. Now there's a few different techniques to do this. If this is a 35th scale model, one of the techniques you can use is a rotary tool with a burr on the end, and just run over and rough up the surface, and even put a couple of little gouge marks, just uneven marks in it. Then you would go over it with a mister surfacer and just brush that on, dab it on. Once it's dry, just sand the rough edges back, and that looks pretty good on a 35th scale turret. But since this is a 48 scale, we're going to need the effect to be a little bit more subtle, a little bit finer. Now there's a few different ways to do this as well. One of them that I have used, and it works fairly well, is to use like a poly glue with a brush in it like this. Just brush over a small area, wait till it starts to get a bit tacky, then use a brush which you've cut the bristles right back down short like that, so it's fairly stiff at the end. when it's tacky, just start dabbing it in where the glued area is, and it will rough the surface up. Now that looks okay, but again you have to wait for it to dry and then soothe off the rough surface, because it'll pull bits of stringy plastic off and stuff like that, and you have to sand it away. The technique I'm going to use though is just using Mr. Surfacer. So we give that a bit of a shake, which I've already done. Just use our brush and take a little bit of the excess off, and we're just going to, I'll do it on the underside of this first, the underside of the turret. Now you just dab it on. Now you keep dabbing in that area as it's starting to set, because if you just dab it and leave it, you won't get that effect. So while it starts to get tacky, you see the effect start to come out. Now you may not be able to see it on the video, but I'll take some stills and put on here so you can see the effect. Okay, now that looks fairly good. That's a fairly fine sort of texture that we got there, and 48 scale, that's what we're after. You can make it a bit more authentic by maybe using a rotary tool if you have one, and just put a couple of little burr marks here and there, which suits the Russian tanks, because like I say, they had a very rough surface. Some of them they did have indentations and stuff, imperfections in their cast. So that's the technique I'm going to use over the turret, and I'll take some photos as I go through it to put on the video here, and you'll see the effect, what it looks like when it's finished. Okay, things are moving along quite smoothly. I just thought I'd point out a couple of problem areas so you know what to expect with